yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. Bonus points to any of you who can name that song. It is a song that aligns quite well with what the Bible says over and over again. The Bible talks about these two paths. We could think about Proverbs 30. We could think about a whole lot. Matthew chapter 7, the Sermon on the Mount, 13 and 14, verses 13 and 14, where Jesus talks about the narrow path that leads to life. Few people find it, the broad path that leads to destruction. A lot of people are going down that path. It's a common theme in the Bible. There are these two paths. It is one of the prominent themes in the book of Proverbs. It's basically the whole idea of the book of Proverbs. You can go this way and you will die, or you can go this way and you will find success and prosperity and life. The book of Proverbs begins with this series of poems, the first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs. Really just a series of poems. The Proverbs don't actually start until chapter 10. Chapter 10 is headed The Proverbs of Solomon. Right before that, though, at the very end of the poems, we have chapter 9, which once again presents to us the call of Lady Wisdom. She's out in the streets calling to the simpletons, to the young men, telling them that they need to find wisdom because wisdom is more precious than gold, more precious than rubies, because it's the kind of thing that will lead to prosperity and success in life. But what's interesting about chapter 9 is that Lady Wisdom is not the only one calling. There's another lady in chapter 9 of Proverbs who is making her call. This is verse 13. The foolish woman, or we might say Lady Folly. The foolish woman is loud. She is ignorant and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the high places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. You who are simple, this is the call of Lady Folly. You who are simple, turn in here. And to those without sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. They do not know that the dead are there, and her guests are in the depths of Sheol. That is the way to destruction, as Proverbs 9, verse 18 makes clear. It is also the way that finds a lot of people walking down that path. We have Lady Folly in the 21st century calling us from all directions. I don't want to say that the 21st century Western society is necessarily the most godless society that has ever been in existence. I mean, what do I know? I mean, I haven't done research on all the societies that have ever been in existence. I don't want to say it's the most godless. And if you go back and you look at the society in which Jesus grew up, or Paul, I don't mean the Jewish society necessarily, but the Greco-Roman society. Well, there were all kinds of gods around, but they were a pretty godless society in a lot of ways as well. But, so maybe we're not the most godless society, I don't know, but we face some challenges that other societies have not faced. Maybe there are some blessings that we enjoy that other societies have not enjoyed. also. But I mean, challenge number one, as far as Lady Folly calling at us, saying, stolen waters are sweet. Come in here. Enjoy bread eaten in secret. Challenge number one, I think, that we face, the internet, of course. I mean, how much folly is at the, what do we say, at the tip of our fingertips, carrying around in our pocket with us on our computer, just all over the place. How much folly that we just, oh, we enjoy that. It feels so good. It's so wonderful to see those images, to read those foolish words, to get involved in those foolish chats. We're talking about this because Paul says in Galatians 5:19. Now, these are the words that he used. Now, the works of the flesh are obvious, evident. And then he lists off a bunch of things he calls the works of the flesh. When we think about the term flesh and the works of the flesh, probably the first thing that comes to our mind is sex. And certainly that is something that comes to Paul's mind as well. I mean, it's in the list. You should read the list. Sex is absolutely there. And again, I don't want to say that the 21st century in Western society is the most sex-crazed society of all time. Again, you might want to study Greco-Roman antiquity before you make some of those claims. But we face certain challenges, don't we, that other societies have not had to face. Did you know that on the internet there is pornography? There are some sites dedicated to pornography on the internet. I bet some of you knew that. I bet some of you know it very well. We have Lady Folly calling out at us from all kinds of directions. We carry Lady Folly around with us in our pockets so that we can constantly hear that call. And she is wanting us to partake in the works of the flesh. And she is assuring us there are no consequences. It's pleasant. It feels good. You're going to enjoy it. And you're not going to have to pay any price. Nobody will ever know. When we think about the works of the flesh, we think about sex. And I don't know, maybe in part that is because of our particular location in time and place. What I mean is, I do think this is a distinctive element about our society, is that we define ourselves in terms of sex, whereas I don't think other cultures have done that, at least not as prominently. Let me say more explicitly what I'm talking about. Are you gay or straight? That is a fundamental uh, way in which people in our society define themselves. It is defining and according to some people, according to a lot of people that are very online or on perhaps our TVs, if we still watch TV, that is perhaps the fundamental way in which you need to define yourself. It's defining yourself according to who you like to have sex with. That's what that is. Paul wants us to recognize that is defining ourselves according to the works of the flesh. I don't mean to tell you all sex is bad. That's not what I'm getting at. But I am getting at defining yourselves according to who you like to have sex with and thinking that that is like some fundamental part of my very existence. I think Paul would say, Your mind is in the wrong place. You're being attracted by Lady Folly over here. You need to be thinking more along the lines of Lady Wisdom. When we think about the works of the flesh, we think about sex, and absolutely sex is a part of it. Read the list. But when you read the list, you will notice that sex is not the most prominent thing Paul wants to point out. It's not even the thing that is mentioned the most often. When Paul thinks about works of the flesh, he thinks about other things like idolatry, sorcery. He's got those things listed here. Idolatry. I don't know if sorcery, we would say that we have a big problem with sorcery. I think if you think about it for about 3 seconds, you'll recognize that there is a big problem in this world with idolatry still today, especially when you think about the way the Bible talks about idolatry. Listen to what Paul wants to say. The works of the flesh include enmities, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy, which all sound like different aspects of the same problem, which is the way we feel about other people. Just a little bit earlier, Paul had said, here is how you're going to fulfill the entire law. What you need to do, this is verse 14, Galatians 5, verse 14. What you need to do is you need to love your neighbor as yourself. You recognize that as not the command that was identified by our Lord as the greatest command, but as the second greatest command. The greatest command, of course, love God. The second greatest, love your neighbor. Paul says, if you keep that command, you will have fulfilled the entire Torah. When you get to the fruit of the Spirit, which is going to come just in a few verses after Paul talks about the works of the flesh, the very first thing he's going to mention is love. I think when you look at the works of the flesh, the thing, at least in my mind, that is the most prominent is that these things are the opposite of love your neighbor as yourself. Enmities, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy. When we think about following the desires of the flesh, what Paul wants us to think about is how that manifests itself a lot of times is in our failure to love your neighbor as yourself. Paul has some others that he wants to name as well. He wants to talk about drunkenness. Yes, there is a problem with drunkenness in the 21st century in Western society. Carousing, I suppose that's similar to drunkenness, maybe with some other elements thrown in there. And then he says, there are other things I don't have time to name right now. Things like these, figure it out. You can figure out what things would be categorized as lust of the flesh. He says they're obvious. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to notice these sorts of things. He wants us to recognize when we are following. He doesn't want us to do it blindly like the stupid young men that Lady Folly is calling to in Proverbs chapter 9, who are just, oh, I'll go in here. You say stolen waters are sweet. Let's drink some. And they don't understand that they are walking the way of death. He wants us to recognize when we are walking the way of death, that this is not something that is just, well, everybody's doing it. Of course, it makes sense. You don't want to stand out in a crowd and all that. But recognize that when you are thinking that this is fundamental to my very existence, or this is what I enjoy, or this is who I am, what you're really doing is fulfilling the lusts of the flesh and abandoning what the Spirit wants to do in you. But there's good news. as Paul wants to tell us in Galatians 5, yes, there are two paths you can go down, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. And maybe you need to change the road you're on.